All right, so welcome, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. And can I just, I'm going to change my format a little bit because we only have 30 minutes, but I'll go through a couple of things really quick. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about how you were raised and what your diet was like when you grew up?
Mm. Well, I grew up in New Jersey and pretty much ate every kind of animal meat and grew up with a father who owned ice cream stores. So we had a lot of ice cream and
Okay.
ate a lot of, yeah, just dairy, ice cream, meat. I mean, really all of it. In New Jersey, what was pretty typical was a lot of Italian cuisine. So we had a lot of
Yep.
beef parmesan and chicken parmesan. I mean, just things that were just completely coated with cheese and cream sauces. I mean, our vegetables were all covered with cream sauces. I mean, pretty
Yeah.
typical American food. I mean, my mother definitely made vegetables, and she definitely made some fresh vegetables, but we also very much had canned vegetables and frozen vegetables. And honestly, I don't have a problem with frozen vegetables. I think frozen vegetables are completely fine. Fresh
Yeah.
up is best. But I can't even imagine putting a vegetable from a can in my mouth now. I just can't even imagine that. But my mom would say that she would say her perception would be probably that, that we ate well and that we ate lots of vegetables. But I was also kind of a picky eater, so I didn't really like a lot of different vegetables, and probably some of that was because of how they were prepared and that they came out of a can, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, and so would you say that your parents kind of thought they were giving you the healthiest diet possible? They knew what everyone else knew about nutrition, nothing more, nothing less, kind of thing.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I think they would also say that they did better than their parents, probably,
Yeah,
in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of awareness. Not much, not a ton,
yeah,
um, not a huge leap, because again, we were eating a lot of canned food, and I think that was really left over from kind of post-war days.
yeah,
So that was a big part of it, but we definitely had more accessibility. The problem is when people learn from their previous generations, meat and animal products tend to be the symbols of affluence, and
yes,
so they wind up incorporating more meat because it's more accessible than it had been to their parents, and because it's a symbol of affluence. And so in that sense, they probably thought they were doing better because there was and still is this perception that incorporating more, having accessibility and incorporating more animal products into your diet is a good thing. So that is probably where they would have said that the nutrients were higher in terms of calories and animal protein. But in terms of
right,
vegetables, frankly, we probably ate more vegetables. We probably ate fewer vegetables than my grandparents did growing
right,
up.
right. Yeah, it's interesting how that happened. It's like when people were more living on the farms, they probably ate a lot more vegetables. But okay, so now it's interesting. I saw that you studied in California, and one of the things I'm interested about is, how does veganism arise in someone's personal choice, and what brings about this transition? So, like, I imagine, when you went to California, there was probably a lot more veganism, vegetarianism. How about when you were growing up? If someone ever approached you and said they were vegan or vegetarian, would you be kind of like, "What are you, crazy? That's totally out there."
I was always very open-minded, always, ever since I was young. And so I personally was always interested in people who did things differently than I did.
Hmm.
So I didn't encounter a lot of vegetarians, not when I was young, certainly. When I was in high school, I'm trying to remember. I mean, by the time I was 18, or well, no, by the time I was 19, I had already read Diet for New America, and I was really interested in
Yeah.
information in that book, mainly how it related to animals, but also I was interested in health issues. I read Dr. Weil's books when I was in my early 20s, and
Yep.
really interested in knowing more and learning more. And when I was about 20 or 21, I worked in a health food store. So I was always very interested in in something different, but I wasn't exposed to it. And I also am very interested in and fascinated by that moment that it happens. And I really think that that's why I spend so much of my work on providing information for people to then do with what they need to make a difference, because I think that really is the difference in terms of, you know, transformation, is when we don't have exposure to information that would guide us in a different direction, then we just keep doing things the way we'd always been taught to do things.
I love what you're saying, and I sense a lot of that. I sense a real practicalness in the way you talk to your listeners and the way you present information. I love that. So could you tell me just briefly, what was the thing, what was your age, and what was the thing that made you decide, hey, I'm going to do this? Did you go vegetarian first? Did you go vegan all the way initially? How did it happen?
Yeah, it was gradual, and it started with land animals after reading Diet for New America, and just immediately did not want to do anything, have anything to do with it. I quickly got involved with animal advocacy in terms of wanting to know more and wanting to learn as much as I could, and outside of even animals for consumption, but animals for research, and animals being used for fur, and animals being used in circuses. I mean, I very quickly tapped into that part of me that had always been very empathetic to animal suffering. And so I stopped eating land animals, but, you know, it's interesting. I read Diet for New America from cover to cover and completely missed the boat on dairy.
I did the same thing. Yeah.
It's pretty typical, right? I mean, so, you know, it was probably convenient for me to miss the boat on those things because I wanted to still consume them. And then I did my own, oh, I'm getting organic and I'm getting free range and all the stuff that we do so that we don't have to be completely awake, just enough so that it's not too inconvenient for us. So I was eating land animals, but I was also continuing to eat aquatic animals. But because I started on that journey and kept asking questions, even though I was still blocked to certain things, eventually it led me to, I mean, I think I was contemplating not eating aquatic animals because my husband and I were having some philosophical discussions about why do we even eat them? Why are we okay eating, you know, salmon, but we're not okay eating sharks? And why are we okay, you know, eating shrimp that are peeled, but we're not okay seeing the head? And so we just kind of had this conversation, and I couldn't justify it. And not long after that, I read a book called Slaughterhouse, which is by Gail Eisnitz, and she was an investigative reporter going in and looking at the effects of this violent industry that slaughter is characterized by. It is characterized by violence, obviously, and it was the thing that completely woke me up, and it was a visceral, emotional, really life-changing moment when I read that book, and that was 16 years ago, and I haven't looked back.
That's cool, because I haven't heard that title, so I'm going to post that on this. That sounds really good. And you're reminding me of one of these quotes of yours that I wanted to include in this, and people should definitely go to your site. Let's have you do this right now. Can you name your site, blog spot, book, all references that'll be useful to people?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you go to joyfulvegan.com, you can find everything there. So my books are there: Joy of Vegan Baking, Vegan Table, Color Me Vegan, Vegan's Daily Companion. The 30-Day Vegan Challenge is there, but you can also go to 30dayveganchallenge.com to do the online program. My podcast is on joyfulvegan.com. So, I mean, that's a really good central place to find everything.
Okay. And this quote I want to read for the viewers. Institutionalized violence against animals will end when we expand our hearts, not because we expand the size of our cages. And I love that. You know, this. I think Temple Grandin has been eulogized and appreciated because she cared for the animals more than they did historically. But I like that you're going a little bit further and saying, wait a minute, you know, as long as we're slaughtering them, there's questionable violence going on here. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. And, you know, this is what's so interesting is she's still working within the system of exploitation and use of the animals. But the thing is, you know, you said she's doing better than how they were historically treated. the thing is, we got to where we are today because of what we've done in the past. The answer is not to go back to the past and try and figure out how to make this work in a system that, again, is characterized by violence. The answer is to move forward. So we're so attached. We're just so attached to this, really what has become an idyllic lifestyle where we rely on animals to farm them, to use them, to take from them what we think we should have. And so for me, it's so old school because it's so retro. It's old. It's done.
And unnecessary.
Unnecessary. It's not working. We've done it. We've tested it. It's not working. Now we need to move forward. And of course that means that we're still relying on agriculture. It's plant agriculture. But the point for me in my work is to encourage people, all of us, from a large scale and an individual scale, to do better than we did before. That's the whole point, is to be more compassionate than we were, to make better decisions than we have, to have better practices than we've had. The answer for me is moving forward, not looking backward.
I love it. I love it. One thing I want to ask you real quickly, since you kind of struggle with this, and I was 25 years vegetarian and finally went vegan, so it took me a long time. And do you think there's any benefit to being vegetarian versus carnivorous, and is it ever possible for there to be a conscious milk production or conscious dairy production? Is that just impossible because you're essentially taking milk from a calf, or are cows capable of producing milk in a way that they can feed their calves and also supply humans?
Yeah. So when you say that, I mean, I really identify, and I think a lot of people identify, and by the way, Paul, I have a few extra minutes, so you're okay. But what I have a problem with are people who are judgmental of vegetarians who are not vegan, who are not there yet. Now, I want everyone to be moved in the direction of reflecting their compassion, and to do that, it's really about not contributing to animal cruelty, and that obviously includes eggs and dairy. And for me, if someone were to come to me and say, okay, I want to make a change, I don't want to contribute to animal cruelty, where would you have me start? I would have people start with dairy, because for me, it's not just about, it is a system based on exploiting the female reproductive system, taking the offspring and taking the milk that belongs to that offspring. Now, you ask if it can be done in a way where the offspring can have some milk and the humans can have some milk. From an economic perspective, which is what this is about, there's no viable way to take milk from a female such that you can make a profit from it and also share that with the offspring. So just from a realistic perspective, it doesn't happen. And then of course, after a female, when her milk production slows down because her baby's supposed to be weaning, then she has to be made pregnant again. And if they're male, the males are useless in an industry that exploits the female reproductive system. So he's killed right away, or if he shares a little bit, eventually he's going to be pulled away from his mother. I have seen and I have heard of many small, local, humane, family-run operations where the offspring are still with the females for a short time. They let them nurse for 6 months or so, probably less than that, but let's give them 6 months. Let's just say that it would be 6 months. And you know what they do? They put a muzzle on the young to hinder them from milking when the farmer doesn't want them to milk. So it's so macabre that you put a muzzle on a calf and it has spikes on it so that if he goes to nurse, his mother kicks him away. How God is that? And these are small operations. These are the ones considered the humane operations. No, we allow the young to still stay with their mother. Yeah, and take only as much as you deem necessary so that we could have the rest so that you can sell it and make a profit. How macabre that we stop the offspring whose milk whose mother's milk that was it was made for him or her, and we make it impossible for them to nurse. I mean, it's just
you know, this is such a huge point, and I think it ties in with what you were saying earlier. It's like educating, because most people don't really realize that these practices are happening. And most people are human to the level where they wouldn't want to see such things happening.
That's right.
So then the next issue becomes, how do you educate the public when there's so much sentimental, historical, embedded economic, cultural, ties to this system? How do you do it? Like I've been at a family reunion this weekend, and there's Snickers behind me because I'm vegan, and it's people just they're like afraid of it or something, and they don't want to look at these things. And of course, I have to confess, for 25 years I didn't look at the dairy side of it, so I'm just like them. So it's like, what can be done to kind of break through this obstacle?
Yeah, the $1 million question, right? That's the $1 million question. Because we all want to know that, because we want change rapidly, because we're talking about millions and millions of animals who are suffering, billions who are suffering. So you kind of alluded to it in terms of what I think is very effective in terms of talking to people who on the surface are snickering and they're resistant and they don't want to know. For me, those are all defense mechanisms, and it's indicative of the fact that they are uncomfortable with what you represent. So if you realize that you're the one in the position of power, that you're the one who actually holds the potential for change, and that's what threatens them, then I think we feel more empowered to be just in that space. So some of it is just our own perception of how we hold ourselves, how we perceive ourselves in these situations, and holding ourselves with empowerment and authority, I think, is the first step.
Yeah, dignity. I like that.
Well, I didn't even say dignity, but dignity, yes, like absolutely. So that would be the first thing, and I think the way we handle ourselves really determines how people respond to us, right? So that's number one. Number two is, well, I guess number one embedded in that is, again, perceiving their defense mechanisms as such. That's what they are. So those things are all surface. Number three, I've lost count, is I really believe that they are compassionate people, even though they're snickering on the outside.
Right.
I'm going to speak to their compassion. And the best way I can speak to their compassion is by creating the common ground of compassion. And so you really hit the nail on the head when you said, I admit, for 25 years, I didn't look at the dairy industry. Exactly. So the most powerful thing you can say when having these conversations with them is, I didn't know. I had no idea. I didn't look either. And when I found out, I just knew it wasn't, it wasn't in keeping with my own principles, and I was really uncomfortable with that. Keeping it to your own story, keeping it to your own, your own story, as opposed to, did you know that? And then trying to remember statistics, and then trying to spout out, the next study that was just done. I mean, those things for me are not effective in terms of literally changing hearts and minds, because that's what we're talking about. Because for me, the difference between even being vegetarian and being vegan is the difference between making a behavioral change and having a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And what I really want to talk about is what my intention is to inspire a paradigm shift. And I think, for me, again, I'm only speaking of my own experience, and what I think works is, what I think is the most effective is telling the truth from a very sympathetic, a very compassionate perspective, but doing it. Now, there's a real fine line between speaking our truth and dictating something to someone. And I think it's the artistry of that people miss. And so vegans we're also passionate. We want change, and we want people to know, and we want them to have the paradigm shift, and we want to speak for the animals. And sometimes that urgency can lead to not the most effective or eloquent way of
Yes.
talking about it, right?
Yeah, right, right.
So it's a matter of kind of gathering ourselves, feeling really confident in the truth that we hold, knowing that people are truly compassionate, but doing it in a way that really speaks up and speaks the truth, but that can be heard, you know, rather than, I mean, I want to attract people. I don't want to deter people. And so there's a little bit of artistry in kind of knowing how to do that.
I like that. I really like that. One way I look at it is, you know, I see some people in the movement who kind of remind me of like a Malcolm X. You know, they have a firebrand approach, and that's that's what they feel they need to do, and that's okay. I do wonder how often that actually wins hearts and minds, but if they feel impelled to work that way, that's their right. I'm a little more inclined to take on your approach, which is, yeah, kind of sense who you're talking to, who your audience is, and see where they're receptive, where they're not receptive, and yeah, kind of finesse it a little. Still being honest and true, but doing it intelligently.
That's right. Absolutely. You summarized it beautifully. And I want to say that there's room for all different approaches. You know, I'm not saying that mine is the right way. I'm saying it's the way that works for me.
Yeah.
And if that speaks to other people who think it might work for them too, that's fantastic. But there is room for the Malcolm X approach. I mean, some people will respond to that. Some people will, some people will respond to that. I can only speak for what I think is the best, and there's probably people in between that spectrum, right, who might
Right.
go one way or the other. So,
Right.
yeah.
Now, one thing I'm curious about is I see you in these pictures with these giant animals, and they're so beautiful. And did you ever worry that one of these, you know, 1,000-pound cows was going to roll over on top of you?
I know, they're so beautiful. You know, it's really funny. I always say that you don't have to love animals in order to not want to hurt them. Some people don't consider themselves animal people, or they're not animal lovers, or they don't, they don't
Right.
love animals. I've always been someone who really loved being in the presence of non-human animals, and I have no fear being around any of these animals. I mean, there's caution because I don't want a 1,500-pound steer to step on my toe, and I've had it happen, and you wear closed-toed shoes to make sure it doesn't hurt too much. But I'm very cautious. When I'm lying down with them, no. I mean, they're aware of their size. They're aware of their, their own autonomy and personhood. They know. But it is so incredible to be in the presence of these animals. They are my inspiration. Just
Well, it's really beautiful. They're beautiful, beautiful images, and I love that when it's just you see these animals that they I mean, I would say they have a soul. They have, that's a nervous system. It's different than a plant, and anybody that's not recognizing that is deliberately not looking at reality. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, you get into the cooking side of things, and it seems to be a really useful way to make transition more possible for a lot of people. Maybe you could talk about that. Perhaps in the public consciousness, the idea of vegan, creates images of deprivation, and I think you're addressing that head on with the variety and with the different ways you're preparing foods. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly my intention. My intention is to represent veganism as the abundant thing that it is, rather than deprivation. And so I started teaching cooking classes back 15 years ago when I found that in raising awareness about these issues, people were very moved to change, and they did change, just, they had the paradigm shift, and I found that they also had questions about the cooking, the food, the nutrition, and of course all of the social aspects. And
Right.
so I found that the cooking classes were a really good, positive, safe, and effective way of quite literally empowering people with the tools that they need to actually make the changes they wanted to make. Because that's what it comes down to. It's these blocks that people have. And for me, my work is about just undoing these blocks so that people don't have any reason or any excuse. I mean, they're always going to have excuses, but they don't have any good
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
to not make the change. And so You know, cooking is a very basic skill that I believe we should all have, and it's not something that my generation was taught, and certainly the generation coming up now is being taught how to cook. So I very much feel that with the tools and some basic skills to get into the kitchen and demystify just being in that kitchen is what really makes the difference for people. I'm not one of these foodies. I'm not a food blogger. I'm not here to like just make it novel. I really want people to have the skills so that they feel empowered to
Yeah.
cook health.
So it tastes good and it's nutritious and it's possible. You
It's
know? Yeah.
And I very much focus on as soon as possible. I don't want people to be in the kitchen for an hour. You don't have to be in the kitchen for an hour to make good, healthful food for yourself and for your family. So it's really it's about demystifying all of the myths about eating vegetables. People think you're going to be in the kitchen for hours and hours eating vegetables. So I raise the bar and I say, can we spend 15 minutes in the kitchen versus 0 minutes in the kitchen? Like, can we do better than 0? Okay, let's agree that 15 minutes is doable. Then what can we do in 15 minutes? Let's make that happen.
I love that. I love that. One thing I'd like to ask you a little bit about is, and you tell me when you have to go. In terms of writing your book, the book, the 30-Day Vegan Challenge, I like that the kind of premise of that is it kind of, you know, Americans like a challenge, and that kind of that invites them. Well, maybe, you know, they'll consider doing that. Is that the first book you've written, and did you have experience writing prior to that?
Oh, no, the 30-Day Vegan Challenge was the 5th book I wrote.
Okay.
And I'm actually revising it, so a new version is coming out, and it's very new, and so really it will technically be my 7th book that I'll have written. But no, my background's in English literature. I've always been a writer, and writing has always been a passion for me. So I have my background is English literature, a master's in English literature, and so to be able to
Okay.
my passion and my skills is an incredible gift to me. It's a fantasy come true to be a writer, you know. And well, I mean, I guess it's the difference between being a writer and an author. I guess an author is published and a writer is not.
Well,
Um,
I'd say you're both. Yeah. So can you briefly name for us the titles of your other books?
Sure. So the first book was The Joy of Vegan Baking, and it was the first. It was the cookbook, and it was on completely demystifying vegan baking. So The Joy of Vegan Baking was the first one. The Vegan Table was the second one. The Color Me Vegan was the third book, and it's a cookbook that breaks up the recipes according to their dominant color.
Okay.
The fourth book is called Vegan's Daily Companion, 365 Days of Inspiration for Living Compassionately. Um,
Beautiful.
then the 30-Day Vegan Challenge came out and then went out of print, and so I just self-published a small volume called On Being Vegan, but now I'm revising the 30-Day Vegan Challenge, and that should be out by the end of 2014. And so to answer your question, yeah, so no, that wasn't my first at all, but I spend most of my day writing either books or articles or editorials or my podcast. So I mean, my days are just I mean, I spend hours and hours writing every day, and it's wonderful, but it's also it's exhausting, obviously. I may have lost you, Paul. I think we may have lost each other. Can you hear me? You can chat. Can you do a little chat to let me know if you can hear me? Um, we can do a part two if you want to call me back. If you want, you can disconnect and then maybe call me back and do a part two. No. All right, call me back.